Now, we've all heard the saying that bigger is better, but when it comes to vintage snare drums, wider snare wires might not be the most beneficial choice because the snare beds are a lot shallower. This is going to cause some of those wires to hang over the edges of the snare bed, and they're going to sound pretty bad. Well, the folks over at Canopus drums were well aware of this problem and recently released the 12-strand version of their vintage wires. So let's go ahead and put them to the test and put them on 4 different vintage snare drums to see how they affect the sound. For those who might be unfamiliar or new to the channel, hi, welcome. My name is Costa, and I am a drummer from Philly, PA. Now before we dive into this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button as well as the bell icon. That way you're notified of any additional content that I upload to the channel. Canopus Drums has 2 different lines for their snare wires, their Backbeat series and their Vintage series. And the Vintage wire series were influenced from the snare wires that you would see on drums from Slingerland and Ludwig from back in the day. And depending on how old the drum is, depends on what the snare bed is all about. So if you have a drum from the 40s or maybe even the 50s, it's a really narrow snare bed. Whereas some of those vintage drums from the 60s that are highly sought after nowadays have a very shallow snare bed. And a set of modern day snare wires might not work on them just because of how they're sitting on the drum. So when you get a set of 12-strand snare wires, they're pretty narrow, so you know it's going to sit within that snare bed. And some of these wires aren't going to be a little bit further down than others. They should all sit flat together. Now, let's talk about the specs of the 4 drums that will be featured in this video. Starting out with the most recorded snare drum of all time, it's a late 60s Ludwig Supraphonic LM400 snare drum. This is a 5x14 chrome over aluminum shell, which is outfitted with 10 double-sided imperial lugs and triple flange hoops on the top and the bottom. Now, this is the drum that I brought back to life in an earlier Snare Saturday video, and during that process, I put a set of the Canopus vintage wires, specifically the 20-strand dry version. Now, the next drum is the other sought-after drum of this era, which is a 60s Ludwig Acrolite. This again is a 5x14 shell, however it is raw aluminum. It is outfitted with 8 double-sided bow tie lugs, triple flange hoops on the top and the bottom, and once again, I have a set of the Canopus 20-strand vintage wires, again, the dry version. Now the next snare drum is another one that was featured in an earlier Snare Saturday video, and it is a Leedy and Ludwig new era snare drum. This is a 4x14 wood shell, and since this shell is so shallow, the lugs are in line with one another. Now this is another 8-lug drum, and when I was bringing this drum back to a playing condition, I put a set of the Vic Firth vintage snappy wires, which were made by Canopus drums. And finally, last but not least, the very last drum is a Ludwig Pioneer snare drum. This is the 6-lug mahogany drum from back in the day, and this drum has the original wires that came with the drum, which were a set of 12-strand wires from Ludwig. Now, as I'm playing each drum, I will transition between the wires that are currently on the drum and the Canopus vintage 12-strand wires. So, enough of me talking. Let's dive in. So now that you've had the chance to hear 4 vintage snare drums with the wires that I had originally installed on them and the Canopus 12-strand vintage wires, which one was your favorite? Could you hear a difference between the wires that were on the drums compared to the 12-strand vintage wires? Also, which one was your favorite combination? So let me know in the comment section below. Also, if you have any other additional questions on the vintage wires, any of the drums in this video, even the gear that I am playing, feel free to leave all of that in the comment section as well, and I will try my best to answer them. If you would like to check out the earlier Snare Saturday videos featuring each one of the drums in this video through broader tuning ranges, I've put links to all of those videos in the description below. Also, if you would like to see what this entire Snare Saturday series is all about, there is a link to the playlist in the description below, and I'll also have it come up right here to make it a bit easier for you. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, please make sure that you give it a thumbs up. That not only makes it easier for others to find it, it is a free and easy way to support the channel. And that is it. Thank you so much for checking out this video on the Canopus 12-strand vintage snare wires. And until next time, see you later.